The barn collapsed in a roar of sparks and screaming timber, flames clawing 50 feet into the black Wyoming sky. Martha Hale stumbled backward, soot choking her lungs, watching everything she'd built alone turn to ash. Then hoofbeats thundered through the smoke. Boone Callahan, riding straight into the inferno she was certain would kill them both. In that moment, with fire reflected in his eyes and her heart hammering against her ribs, Martha understood. Survival wasn't the question anymore. The question was whether she'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in a world that had never made room for women like her. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Martha's story travels. And if this opening grabbed you, hit that like button and settle in. This is a story about fire, resilience, and a woman who refused to shrink. Let's begin. The wind across Jericho Hollow carried judgment the way it carried dust, constant, abrasive, impossible to wash clean. Martha Hale stood at her kitchen window, flour dusting her forearms to the elbow, watching the town sprawl in the middle distance like a collection of wooden teeth against the Wyoming plains. 26 years old, alone. Too large for parlor chairs, too broad-shouldered for delicate work. Too much of everything the territory valued in its women except the things that actually mattered. Her cabin sat at the ragged edge of belonging, close enough to see chimney smoke from the general store, far enough that visitors were rare and always purposeful. The land around her place ran to scrub grass and struggling vegetable rows, a chicken coop held together with hope and baling wire, and a barn that leaned slightly westward as if trying to escape the prevailing wind. She kneaded dough with practiced efficiency, her hands strong and sure. Baking was the one art her mother had taught her before the fever took her on the wagon trail west, before Martha's father drank himself to death in a canvas tent outside Laramie, before the winter that froze her brother solid in his bedroll. The territory had cost her everything except breath and stubbornness, and some days she wasn't certain which was the greater burden. The pie crust came together beneath her palms. Apple, because the gnarled tree behind the cabin still produced despite neglect, despite hail, despite Martha's own inexperience with cultivation. She'd learned to tend it the way she'd learned everything else, through failure, adjustment, and the kind of quiet persistence that nobody ever applauded. Outside, the afternoon stretched long and golden. Harvest time in Jericho Hollow, when the few successful ranchers brought their yields to town and the air smelled of wheat chaff and congratulation. Martha wouldn't be joining the festivities. She never did. The last time she'd ventured to a town dance, Clarissa Vale had laughed loud enough for the entire hall to hear, pointing out that Martha's dress fabric could have made 2 proper gowns with material to spare. The memory still burned. She slid the pie into her wood-fired oven, adjusting the damper with the ease of repetition, then wiped her hands on her apron. Through the window, movement caught her eye. A rider approaching on a bay horse, tall in the saddle, unhurried. Unusual. Her property wasn't on the way to anywhere except deliberate isolation. Martha stepped onto her porch as the rider drew near, shading her eyes against the slanting sun. The man sat his horse like someone born to leather and long distances. Broad-shouldered, weathered, with dark hair pushed back beneath a wide-brimmed hat and a face that looked carved rather than merely aged. He guided his mount to her fence line and stopped, touching his hat brim in greeting. "Ma'am," he said. His voice carried the texture of gravel and smoke. "I'm turned around. Callahan Ranch. Would you know the way?" Martha blinked. Everyone in 50 miles knew where the Callahan spread lay, vast and prosperous north of town. But the man asking didn't look lost so much as deliberate, his pale eyes taking in her cabin, her garden, the wash hanging on the line with the kind of attention most people reserved for livestock or ledgers. "North Road," she said, pointing. "Follow it past the creek fork, then west when you see the lightning-split cottonwood. Can't miss it." He nodded slowly, but didn't turn his horse. Instead, his gaze drifted to her vegetable rows, the struggling tomatoes, the determined squash vines, the plot she'd turned by herself with a spade and sheer bloody-mindedness. "That's fine work," he said. "Rocky soil out here." Something in Martha's chest tightened. Compliments were currencies she rarely handled. "Gets the job done." "I'm Boone Callahan." He dismounted with fluid ease, offering his hand across the fence. "Took over the ranch from my uncle last spring." She hesitated, then accepted. His grip was firm, calloused, absent the lingering assessment she'd learned to expect from men. He shook her hand the way he might shake another rancher's, with straightforward respect. "Martha Hale." "Miss Hale." He released her hand, glancing toward the cabin. "Forgive the intrusion, but I smell apple pie, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious whether it tastes as good as it smells." The directness startled her into something close to laughter. "It's not ready yet." "Another time, then." Boone gathered his reins but paused, one boot in the stirrup. "You manage this place alone?" The question could have been condescension, could have been pity, but his tone carried only curiosity, the kind a fellow homesteader might ask before offering surplus seed or discussing irrigation. "I do," Martha said. He swung into the saddle, settling with the ease of long practice. "That's respectable work. Thank you for the directions, Miss Hale." He rode north without looking back, dust rising beneath his horse's hooves, leaving Martha standing on her porch with flowers still dusting her arms and a strange warmth spreading beneath her breastbone. Nobody had called her work respectable. Nobody had looked at her garden instead of her waistline. Nobody had asked about pie without making it a referendum on her worth as a woman. The oven timer chimed. She returned to her kitchen, pulling the pie free, golden, perfect, fragrant with cinnamon and effort. She set it to cool on the windowsill and told herself Boone Callahan's courtesy meant nothing. Men were kind when it cost them nothing. Kindness at a distance was easy. She wouldn't let herself hope for more. 3 days passed before Boone returned. Martha was hauling water from the well, her shoulders aching and her dress clinging to her back with sweat, when hoofbeats announced his approach. He rode the same bay, but this time a canvas sack hung from his saddle horn. "Miss Hale," he called, dismounting before she could set down her bucket. "Mr. Callahan." She straightened, wiping her palms on her apron, suddenly conscious of her disheveled state. "You find your way home all right?" "Eventually." A hint of humor touched his mouth. "Brought you something." He untied the sack and handed it over. Martha opened it to find apples, 24 at least, their skins blushed red and gold, firm and fresh. Her breath caught. "From my uncle's orchard," Boone said. "Thought you might put them to use better than I would." Martha stared at the fruit, throat tight. Apples were currency in the territory, valuable, laborious to grow, hoarded through winter. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" "It's too much." "It's a trade." He tilted his head toward her cabin. "You bake pie. I provide apples. Seems fair." She looked up, searching his face for mockery or expectation. Found neither. Only patience, and something that might have been loneliness matching her own. "All right," she said quietly. "Trade." "Good." Boone settled his hat more firmly. "I'll be by end of week, if that suits." "It suits!" He rode off again, and Martha carried the apples inside with hands that trembled slightly. She set them on her table, their weight and color and possibility filling her small kitchen with brightness she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. That evening, she baked 2 pies, one for trade, one for keeping. The act felt like defiance and hope tangled together, inseparable. When Boone returned on Saturday, she had pie waiting. He tied his horse to her fence and joined her on the porch, accepting the slice she offered on her mother's chipped plate. He ate slowly, deliberately, his expression unreadable. "Best I've ever had," he said finally. Martha's cheeks warmed. "You're just being kind." "I'm being honest." He met her eyes. "There's a difference." They sat in silence, the prairie wind moving through the grass, the sky vast and indifferent overhead. Martha waited for him to make his excuses and leave. Instead, he gestured toward her sagging fence line. "That northeast corner's about to give up," he observed. "I could bring posts next time, help you shore it up." "I can manage." "I know you can." Boone's tone held no challenge. "But 2 sets of hands finish faster." Martha studied him, this tall, quiet rancher who kept appearing at her threshold with apples and offers of labor. Suspicion warred with something more fragile. "Why?" "Because fences matter. Because you shouldn't have to do everything alone." He stood, brushing crumbs from his trousers. "And because your company's pleasant, Miss Hale, if that's permitted." He left before she could answer, but the question lingered. Pleasant, as if her presence had value beyond utility or obligation, as if she might be wanted rather than merely tolerated. That night, Martha lay awake listening to coyotes yip in the darkness, her mind turning over the impossible notion that Boone Callahan might actually mean what he said. The fence work began the following week. Boone arrived with cedar posts and wire, tools clanking in his saddlebags, and together they measured and dug and hammered beneath the climbing sun. Martha worked in her oldest dress, sweat soaking through the fabric, her muscles burning with exertion. Boone never commented on her size, never offered to take over when the work grew difficult. He simply handed her the next post, steadied the wire while she secured it, matched her pace without condescension. They fell into rhythm, labor and rest, conversation and comfortable silence. He told her about the Callahan Ranch, about his uncle's death and the responsibility that had fallen onto his shoulders, about drought and debt and the constant gamble of cattle. She told him about the wagon trail, about loss, about learning to survive in a place that had never promised mercy. "You're stronger than most men I know," Boone said one afternoon, wiping his brow. Martha stiffened. Strength was a compliment people gave when they couldn't say beautiful. "I'm large. There's a difference." "That's not what I meant." He set down his hammer, meeting her gaze squarely. "I meant you've got sand, grit. You don't quit." "Quitting's a luxury. So's honesty." Boone's expression remained steady. "You think I don't see how this town treats you? How they look at you like you're failing some test you never agreed to take?" Heat flooded Martha's face. "I don't need pity." "Good. I'm not offering it." He picked up his hammer again. "I'm offering respect and friendship, if you'll have it." The words settled between them like stones in a foundation. Martha's hand shook as she reached for the next post. Nobody had offered her friendship without conditions. Nobody had suggested her worth existed independent of appearance or domesticity. "Friendship," she echoed. "Unless that's not welcome." "It's welcome." Her voice came rough. "It's just unexpected." Boone's mouth curved slightly. "Best things usually are." They finished the fence as the sun lowered, casting their shadows long across the prairie. When Boone finally mounted his horse, he paused. "There's a barn dance Saturday," he said. "Town hall. I don't suppose you'd consider attending." Martha's stomach dropped. The dances were Clarissa Vale's territory, elaborate dresses and cruel laughter and pointed exclusion. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because—" She gestured helplessly at herself. "You know why." Boone's jaw tightened. "I know the town's full of small-minded people who wouldn't recognize strength if it built their fences for them. I also know you've got more courage in your left hand than most of them combined." He gathered his reins. "But it's your choice, Miss Hale. Just know I'd be honored to stand beside you if you went." He rode off before she could respond, leaving Martha alone with the weight of an invitation she couldn't possibly accept and the terrible, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could. Saturday arrived wrapped in autumn chill. Martha stood before her tiny mirror, studying her reflection with the familiar ache of inadequacy. Her best dress was calico, patched at the elbows, let out twice to accommodate her frame. Her hair refused to curl. Her face was plain, honest, unremarkable. She looked like herself, and for the first time in memory she wondered if that might be enough. The decision crystallized slowly. She wouldn't go for validation, wouldn't go to prove anything to Clarissa Vale or the other women who'd made sport of her discomfort. She'd go because Boone had asked, because friendship meant meeting people halfway, even when the distance felt impossible. She braided her hair, pinned it carefully, and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Then she hitched her mare to the small cart her father had built a lifetime ago and drove toward town with her heart hammering against her ribs. The hall glowed with lantern light, music spilling into the street, fiddle and accordion, laughter and stamping feet. Martha tied her mare at the rail and stood for a long moment, gathering courage like kindling. Inside, the room pulsed with heat and motion. Couples whirled across the floor, women clustered near the refreshment table, men gathered by the door with whiskey and tobacco. And there, in the center of the feminine congregation, stood Clarissa Vale, blonde, delicate, draped in blue silk that probably cost more than Martha's entire cabin. Their eyes met. Clarissa's mouth curved into a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Well," she said, loud enough to cut through the music. "Look what the wind blew in. I didn't know they made dresses in circus tents." Laughter rippled outward. Martha's face burned, her hands clenching in her skirts. She should leave, should turn around and preserve what remained of her dignity. Then Boone appeared at her elbow. He didn't acknowledge Clarissa, didn't offer platitudes or defenses. He simply stood beside Martha, solid and deliberate, his presence a statement louder than any words. "Miss Hale," he said quietly, "I'm glad you came." Martha's throat closed. She managed a nod. Clarissa's laughter died. Her eyes narrowed, darting between Martha and Boone with something that might have been confusion or calculation. "Boone Callahan, surely you're not—" "Excuse us." Boone offered Martha his arm. "I believe they're starting a waltz." He guided her toward the floor, and Martha followed in a daze of disbelief and terror. She'd never danced, never had the opportunity or the courage. Her body felt enormous and ungainly, her feet leaden. "I don't know how," she whispered. "Neither do I, really." Boone positioned her hand on his shoulder, took her other hand in his. "But I figure if we stay upright and don't crash into anyone, we'll count it a victory." The music swelled. He moved and she followed, clumsy, uncertain, hyper-aware of every eye tracking their progress. But Boone's grip remained steady, his expression calm, and slowly the terror eased into something else. Not grace, but effort. Not perfection, but presence. They completed one circuit of the floor, then another. Martha's breathing steadied. She met Boone's eyes and found no judgment there, no embarrassment, only quiet determination and something that might have been pride. When the music ended, scattered applause filled the hall. Boone released her carefully, as if she might shatter. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For being here. For being exactly who you are." Martha's vision blurred. She blinked hard, swallowing against the pressure in her chest. Before she could respond, Clarissa's voice sliced through the moment. "How charitable of you, Boone." She approached with silk rustling, her smile poisonous. "Offering pity dances to those less fortunate. Though I suppose someone has to entertain the, shall we say, sturdy among us." Boone's expression didn't change. "Miss Vale." "We were just discussing the church fundraiser." Clarissa gestured to the women behind her, their faces carefully neutral. "Deciding who might contribute baked goods, though I'm not sure Martha's offerings would quite suit the occasion." The implication hung clear. Martha's pies, like Martha herself, were too coarse, too common, too much of the wrong things for refined society. Martha's hands fisted in her skirts. She'd survived winters that killed grown men, buried her family alone, built a life from splinters and determination. And still, these women made her feel worthless. "Actually," Boone said, his voice gone cold, "Miss Hale's apple pie is the finest I've tasted. I'd wager it would fetch twice what yours might, Miss Vale." Clarissa's smile froze. Around them, conversations faltered, attention sharpening. "How gallant," Clarissa said softly. "But we both know charity isn't the same as, if you'll excuse us." Boone's interruption was surgical. He turned to Martha. "Shall we step outside? It's gotten rather stifling in here." He offered his arm again. Martha took it, her pulse roaring in her ears, and together they walked toward the door. Behind them, whispers erupted like brush fire. The night air hit cold and clean. Martha pulled her shawl tight, her hands shaking with adrenaline and humiliation and fury at herself for caring what Clarissa Vale thought. "I shouldn't have come," she said. "No." Boone's voice was rough. "I shouldn't have been silent." She looked at him sharply. "When she mocked you before, at the summer gathering, I said nothing." His jaw worked. "Told myself it wasn't my business, that you could handle yourself. But silence is a choice, and I chose wrong." Martha's anger shifted, complicated by the raw honesty in his admission. "You can't fight every battle for me." "I'm not trying to." He met her eyes. "But I can stand beside you, make it clear you're not alone, and I failed to do that when it mattered." The apology landed heavy and genuine. Martha studied his face in the lamplight spilling from the hall. The weathered lines, the steady gaze, the absence of performance or pretense. "You're here now," she said quietly. "I am." His expression softened. "And I'd like to keep being here, if you'll let me." The implications stretched beyond friendship, beyond fences and apple pies and Saturday dances. Martha felt it in her bones, terrifying and impossible and more real than anything she'd dared imagine. Before she could respond, a shout erupted from the north, high, panicked, cutting through the night. Both turned toward the sound. Against the darkness, an orange glow painted the horizon, pulsing and spreading. Fire. Boone's face drained of color. "That's coming from the eastern properties." Martha's blood turned to ice. Her cabin lay directly in that path, along with everything she owned, everything she'd built, everything that kept her alive. "My barn," she breathed. Boone was already moving, untying his horse with swift efficiency. "Come on!" She ran for her cart, unhitching the mare with shaking hands. Boone mounted and spurred his horse into a gallop without waiting, racing toward the glow that climbed higher with every second. Martha followed, whipping the reins, her mare lunging forward into a flat-out run that rattled her teeth and burned her lungs. The wind carried smoke now, thick, acrid, choking. The glow resolved into flames, massive and hungry, consuming the prairie grass in waves of orange fury. Martha's property sat directly in its path, her cabin silhouetted against the inferno, her barn already crowned with fire. The prairie was burning, and with it, everything she had left to lose. The mare's hooves pounded earth that trembled with heat, sparks swirling through the air like malevolent fireflies. Martha crouched low over the reins, eyes streaming from smoke, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. Ahead, Boone's silhouette cut through the hellish glow, his horse plunging toward the flames without hesitation. Her barn was a torch against the night sky, timber groaning, shingles peeling away in burning strips that the wind carried like dark angels toward the cabin. The vegetable garden she'd tended through drought and hail was already lost, blackened stalks crumbling to ash. The chicken coop erupted in a shower of sparks as the roof caved inward. Martha hauled on the reins, the cart skidding to a halt near the well. Boone was already dismounting, his face illuminated in flickering orange. "The livestock!" he shouted over the roar. "How many?" 4 chickens survived, the mare, 1 milk cow in the barn. Her voice cracked on the last word. The cow would be dead already, or dying. The thought carved through her chest. "Where's your cow pastured?" "North paddock, but I'll get her. You soak anything that'll hold water." Boone grabbed a coil of rope from his saddle. "We can't stop this, Martha, but we can maybe save what matters." He ran toward the barn before she could argue, disappearing into smoke so thick it seemed solid. Martha turned to the well, her hands shaking violently as she hauled up the bucket. Water sloshed over the rim, precious, insufficient, almost laughable against the scale of destruction advancing on her property. She soaked her shawl, wrapped it around her face, and started throwing water on the cabin's west wall. The heat was immense, pressing against her skin like something physical. Paint blistered and peeled. The window glass cracked with sounds like rifle shots. She threw bucket after bucket, her shoulders screaming, knowing it was futile but unable to stop. A crash split the night. The barn's main beam collapsing, sending a column of sparks 50 feet into the air. Martha's heart seized. Boone was in there. "Boone!" Her scream tore her throat raw. Movement in the smoke, a dark shape emerging, leading the milk cow by rope around her neck. The animal's eyes rolled white with terror, but she followed Boone's steady pull, stumbling over debris. Behind them, the barn groaned once more and folded inward like paper, flames shooting through the wreckage. Boone's face was black with soot, his shirt singed at the shoulder. He handed Martha the rope without ceremony. "Get her to the east field, far side of the creek. Go now." "What about you?" "I'll wet down the cabin. Move!" Martha grabbed the rope and ran, dragging the terrified cow behind her. The animal balked, bellowing, but Martha's desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She hauled the cow across scorched grass, through smoke that turned the world into shifting gray chaos, toward the creek that marked her property's eastern boundary. The water was low from the dry season, barely knee-deep, but it was enough. Martha drove the cow into the shallows and followed, sinking down until the creek soaked her dress and cooled her burning skin. She held the rope tight, murmuring nonsense reassurances to the animal while her cabin, her life, burned behind them. Through the smoke, she saw Boone silhouetted against the flames, hurling bucket after bucket at the cabin walls. The fire had reached the porch now, consuming the steps she'd climbed 10,000 times. The rocking chair her father had built went up in seconds. The door frame blackened and warped. Then the wind shifted. The change was sudden and vicious, swinging the fire's direction southward, away from the cabin and toward open prairie. The grass there was shorter, grazed down by the cow, offering less fuel. The flames hesitated, searching, then began to lose their fury as they hit the barrier of dirt and stone around the well. Boone kept throwing water, methodical despite exhaustion. Martha watched him work with her heart in her throat, the cow's labored breathing loud in her ears. Minutes stretched like hours. The eastern sky began to pale, not dawn, but the sickly gray that came before it. Finally, Boone set down the bucket. He stood swaying slightly, staring at the wreckage, then turned and walked toward the creek. His legs seemed to barely hold him. When he reached the water's edge, he simply sat down in the mud and put his head in his hands. Martha released the cow, the animal wouldn't wander far from water, and waded toward him. She sank down beside him without speaking, her body trembling with shock and adrenaline crash. Together they watched the barn's skeleton collapse further, glowing embers pulsing in the wreckage like dying stars. "The cabin's standing," Boone said finally. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw. "West wall's scorched, windows are gone, but the structure held." Martha looked at the dark shape of her home, battered but upright. It should have felt like victory. Instead, she felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything except exhaustion. "I can rebuild the barn," she heard herself say. "I've done it before." "You shouldn't have to do it alone." She turned to look at him. In the gray light, his face was a study in contrast, pale skin beneath soot, bloodshot eyes, jaw tight with determination despite the way his shoulders slumped. "You could have died," she said. "So could you. This isn't your fight." "The hell it isn't." Boone lifted his head, meeting her gaze. "You think I rode into that fire because of charity? Because I felt obligated?" He shook his head. "I did it because the thought of you losing everything made me sick. Because somewhere between fence posts and apple pie you became—" He stopped, jaw working, searching for words. "Became what?" Martha whispered. "Important. To me." The admission came rough, almost angry. "More than friendship. More than I expected or planned for. And I know I've got no right. I know you've got every reason to send me packing, but there it is." The dawn broke properly then, pale light spilling across the devastated landscape, turning ash silver and smoke gold. Martha stared at Boone. This man who'd ridden into fire for her, who'd stood beside her in the face of mockery, who was now looking at her like she held something precious he was afraid to break. "I'm not the kind of woman men want," she said. The words tasted like old wounds. "I'm too large, too plain, too—" "Stop." Boone's hand found hers in the mud and creek water, his grip warm despite the cold seeping into their bones. "Do you think I'm blind?" "I see you, Martha. Not some imaginary version that fits Clarissa Vale's approved dimensions. You. The woman who rebuilt a life from nothing, who bakes the best damn pie in the territory, who just drove a terrified cow through a wildfire because saving her mattered." His thumb traced the back of her knuckles. "You think that's not beautiful? You think strength and stubbornness and survival aren't worth more than a small waist and yellow curls?" Martha's throat closed completely. Tears cut tracks through the soot on her face, and she couldn't stop them, couldn't pretend she wasn't breaking open under the weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. "I don't know how to believe that," she managed. "Then let me believe it until you can." Boone squeezed her hand. "Let me stand here and remind you until it sticks." The cow lowed softly, shaking water from her hide. Somewhere in the ruined garden, a bird began to sing, tentative, testing the air for safety. The world hadn't ended. It had only changed, violent and sudden, and somehow they'd survived it together. "All right," Martha whispered. Boone's expression shifted, relief and something fiercer, something that made her chest ache with possibility. He raised her mud-caked hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, deliberate and reverent. "Then we'll start there," he said. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, turning the destruction stark and unavoidable. The barn was total loss. Nothing salvageable except perhaps some tools buried in the rubble. The garden would need to be completely replanted. The chicken coop required rebuilding from scratch. The cabin's interior would be smoke-damaged, water-stained, every surface marked by the fire's near miss. But the walls stood. The foundation held. And Martha wasn't alone. Eventually they rose, Bones protesting, and made their way back to assess the damage properly. The cabin's interior was a disaster, smoke stains darkening the ceiling, her few pieces of furniture soaked and blistered, the curtains reduced to charred fragments. But the structure was sound. The wood stove remained intact. Her mother's recipe box, kept on a high shelf, had survived. Martha pulled it down with shaking hands, opening the lid to find the cards inside pristine and untouched. She pressed the box to her chest and let herself cry properly, great shaking sobs that bent her double. Boone's hand settled on her shoulder, steady and sure, offering comfort without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. When she finally straightened, wiping her face with her ruined sleeve, she found him watching her with understanding that needed no explanation. "I'll ride to town," he said quietly. "Get supplies. Tell folks what happened. We'll need lumber, tools, hands if anyone's willing." "They won't come." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "Why would they help me?" "Because it's the right thing to do, and because if they don't, they'll answer to me." Boone's expression hardened. "I've got standing in Jericho Hollow, whether I want it or not. Callahan land, Callahan name, it carries weight. Time I used it for something that matters." Martha shook her head. "I don't want your charity or your guilt driving people here. It's not charity to help a neighbor. It's not guilt to stand up when someone's been knocked down." He caught her chin gently, tilting her face up. "Let me do this, Martha. Not because you can't manage alone. I know you can. But because you shouldn't have to." The fight drained out of her. She was tired, bone-tired, soul-tired, exhausted from years of carrying everything herself. The thought of accepting help felt like weakness and relief tangled together, inseparable and overwhelming. "Just supplies," she conceded. "I won't have people here out of obligation." "Fair enough." Boone stepped back, his hand lingering on her shoulder a moment longer. "Rest if you can. I'll be back before dark." He mounted his horse, the animal still skittish from the fire's proximity, and rode toward town at a steady lope. Martha watched until he disappeared into the distance, then turned to survey the wreckage of her life with something close to resolve building in her chest. She'd survived worse. She'd rebuild. And this time, she wouldn't be ashamed of accepting a hand when it was offered. The day stretched long and surreal. Martha salvaged what she could from the cabin. Clothes singed but wearable, her father's tools, the cast-iron pan that had survived 2 generations. She dragged ruined furniture outside, swept ash from the floors, opened every window frame that still existed to let air chase out the lingering smoke. By mid-afternoon, her hands were blistered and her back screamed with every movement, but the cabin looked less like a disaster and more like a project. Manageable. Survivable. She was hauling another bucket of creek water when hoofbeats announced visitors. Martha straightened, shading her eyes, expecting Boone. Instead, 3 wagons rolled up her path, the general store owner, the blacksmith, and to her shock, the minister's wife. They came loaded with lumber, canvas tarps, food wrapped in cloth, and expressions that ranged from sympathetic to awkward. Boone rode alongside them, his face carefully neutral. The blacksmith, a man named Tucker with arms like tree trunks, and a wife who'd never spoken 2 words to Martha, climbed down first. "Miss Hale," he said, removing his hat. "Heard about the fire. Thought you might use some help with the rebuild." Martha stood frozen, unable to process the kindness. That's not necessary." "Course it's necessary." Tucker's wife appeared at his elbow, carrying a basket that smelled of fresh bread. "We're neighbors, aren't we? This is what neighbors do." The minister's wife approached more hesitantly. "I brought bandages and salve. Mr. Callahan said you might have burns." Martha looked at Boone, who dismounted with deliberate casualness. Supplies, like you asked. These folks volunteered to help haul them. The lie was transparent and generous. Martha's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed in front of these people who'd never given her the time of day before tonight. That's kind of you, she managed. Where do you want us to start? Tucker surveyed the ruins with a practiced eye. Barn's a loss, but we can clear it. Cabin needs new windows, fresh chinking. That fence line's compromised. Fire jumped it in places. They set to work without waiting for her approval, unloading lumber and organizing tools with the efficiency of people accustomed to hard labor. Martha found herself swept up in their purpose, assigned tasks, holding boards steady, fetching water, directing where supplies should be stacked. The minister's wife, whose name was Helen, tended Martha's burns with gentle efficiency. These need to stay clean, she said quietly. I'll leave the salve. Apply it twice daily. Thank you. Martha studied the woman's face, searching for judgment or condescension. Found only concern. I'm sorry, Helen said suddenly, for not being kinder before. For not... She trailed off, hands twisting in her apron. For letting Clarissa and the others speak the way they did. It was wrong, and I was a coward for staying silent. The apology landed unexpectedly, cracking something in Martha's carefully maintained armor. You're here now? I am. Helen's smile was small but genuine. And I hope you'll let me keep being here, as a friend. Martha nodded, not trusting her voice, and Helen squeezed her hand before moving to help organize the medical supplies. As the afternoon wore into evening, more people arrived. The livery owner with spare chickens to replace those lost, a rancher from east of town with a young heifer that needed a home. Even a few women Martha recognized from town, carrying pies and preserves and awkward sympathy. Not everyone came with pure motives. Martha saw the curious glances, the whispered conversations, the way some people clearly came to observe rather than assist. But enough showed up with genuine intent that the work progressed steadily. The burned debris cleared, the cabin's damaged walls reinforced with fresh timber. Boone worked alongside Tucker and the other men, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the autumn chill, never once drawing attention to himself or claiming credit for organizing the effort. When Martha caught his eye across the yard, he offered a small nod, acknowledgement without expectation. By sunset, the property looked transformed, not restored, but stabilized. The barn remained skeletal wreckage, but the debris was organized for salvage. The cabin had new window frames waiting for glass, walls reinforced, roof patched where embers had burned through. The fence line was marked for repair. As people began packing up to leave, they offered parting words, promises to return, invitations to Sunday supper, small gestures that felt monumental in their ordinariness. Martha accepted each one with gratitude that stuck in her throat, overwhelmed by the sudden intrusion of community into her carefully isolated existence. When the last wagon rolled away, only Boone remained. He stood by his horse, clearly reluctant to leave her alone but unwilling to presume. You should go, Martha said. You've done more than enough. I could stay, sleep in the barn ruins, make sure the fire doesn't restart. There's nothing left to burn. Then I could stay because I don't want to leave you here alone after everything. Boone's honesty was becoming familiar, sharp, and uncomfortable and necessary. Martha looked at her cabin, at the smoke-stained walls and empty window frames, at the destruction that remained despite the day's progress. Then she looked at Boone, exhausted, filthy, watching her with an expression that made her chest ache. There's a chair that survived, she said quietly, on the north side. You could sit there, if you wanted. Relief flickered across his face. I'd like that. They settled on opposite sides of the porch, proper distance maintained, propriety observed despite the intimacy of survival shared. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant and indifferent. Coyotes called from the hills. The prairie wind carried the scent of ash and approaching autumn. Can I ask you something? Martha said into the darkness. Anything. Why me? I know you said I matter to you, but I need to understand why. What you see when you look at me that everyone else misses. Boone was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that meant he was choosing words carefully. I see someone who doesn't quit, he said finally. someone who faces hard truth without flinching. When I look at you, I don't see size or appearance or any of the shallow measurements people use to judge worth. I see capability, resilience, honesty without performance. He shifted in his chair. I see someone I trust, someone whose company makes me better, someone I want to build something with, if she'll let me. Martha's breath caught. Build what? I don't know yet. A barn, maybe. A life, if we're lucky. His voice roughened. I know I'm getting ahead of myself. I know you've got every reason to be cautious, but I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel. You matter, Martha. Not in spite of who you are, but because of it. The declaration hung between them, vulnerable and irrevocable. Martha's hands trembled in her lap. Every instinct screamed that this was too good to be real, that men like Boone didn't want women like her, that she should protect herself before the inevitable disappointment arrived. But he'd ridden into fire for her, had stood beside her when it cost him social capital, had just spent an entire day organizing help from a town that had never shown her kindness. Maybe, just maybe, she could let herself believe him. I'm scared, she admitted. Of me? Of hoping. Of trusting this is real and having it taken away. Boone stood and crossed to her side of the porch, kneeling in the dirt so they were eye level. His hands found hers, calloused and warm and steady. I can't promise nothing will go wrong, he said. Can't promise the town will suddenly love you or that we won't face more fires. But I can promise I'm not going anywhere. I can promise that when I say you matter, I mean it with everything I've got. His thumbs brushed her knuckles. And I can promise I'll spend every day proving it, if you'll give me the chance. Martha studied his face in the starlight, the honesty there, the determination, the careful hope that matched her own. Then she did something she'd never allowed herself before. She chose to believe. All right, she whispered. We'll build something, together. Boone's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his weathered features into something close to joy. He raised her hands to his lips again, kissing each set of knuckles with deliberate reverence, then settled beside her on the porch steps instead of returning to his chair. They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened, shoulders touching, hands loosely clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. The prairie stretched vast and unforgiving around them, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, Martha didn't feel alone in facing it. The barn would be rebuilt, the garden replanted. The scars from tonight would fade into stories they'd tell years from now, when the fear had softened into memory. But this moment, this fragile, impossible moment of choosing hope over fear, of allowing herself to be seen and valued, this would remain sharp and clear forever. Martha leaned her head against Boone's shoulder, feeling his steady breathing, the warmth of him beside her. He turned slightly, pressing a kiss to her temple, gentle and undemanding. Thank you, she said. For what? For not letting me face this alone. For standing when you could have walked away. Martha. He said her name like a promise. I'm not walking anywhere. You're stuck with me now. She smiled into the darkness, letting herself imagine what that might mean. Shared mornings and honest conversation, labor divided and burdens halved, a future built on burned ground and second chances. It wouldn't be easy. The town's acceptance was fragile at best. Clarissa Vale would sharpen her knives. Winter was coming, and the rebuilding would be brutal. But for the first time since the wagon trail west, Martha felt something stronger than survival. She felt possibility. The dawn brought cold clarity, and the stiffness of muscles pushed beyond their limits. Martha woke on her porch wrapped in a blanket she didn't remember retrieving, Boone's coat folded beneath her head as a makeshift pillow. He sat on the steps below, his back against the post, already awake and watching the sunrise paint the devastation in shades of rose and gold. You should have gone inside, he said without turning. Couldn't leave you out here alone. Martha sat up, wincing as her shoulders protested. Every part of her body ached with the bone-deep exhaustion that came after crisis passed. What time is it? Just past 6. Boone stood and stretched, joints cracking audibly. I should head back to the ranch. Livestock won't tend themselves. The thought of him leaving sent unexpected panic through Martha's chest. Foolish, given that he'd promised to return. But the past 12 hours had stripped away her usual defenses. She felt raw, exposed, uncertain how to navigate this new territory between them. "When will you be back?" The question came out smaller than she intended. Boone turned, his expression softening. "This afternoon. I'll bring proper tools for the barn rebuild. And lumber. I've got surplus from the spring cutting." He crossed to where she sat and crouched down, taking her hand. "Unless you'd rather I stayed away. Give you time to think without me underfoot." "No?" Martha gripped his fingers. "Come back, please." He smiled, genuine and unguarded, transforming his weathered face into something that made her breath catch. "Then I'll be here. Count on it." He left after helping her carry water from the creek, his horse picking careful paths through the scorched earth. Martha watched until he disappeared over the rise, then turned to face her property in full daylight. The destruction looked worse than she'd imagined. The barn was complete loss, charred timbers jutting like broken bones, corrugated metal twisted into abstract shapes by heat. The garden was ash and blackened stalks. The chicken coop existed only as scattered debris. Even the outhouse had burned, leaving her without basic necessities. But the cabin stood, smoke-stained, water-damaged, stripped of comfort, but structurally sound. Martha climbed the steps and entered, breathing through her mouth against the acrid smell that permeated everything. Her mother's recipe box sat on the table where she'd left it. She opened it again, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting. Measurements and instructions written in fading ink, annotations in the margins noting adjustments and improvements. These cards had survived the wagon trail, her father's decline, brutal winters, and now fire. They felt like promises that survival was possible. Martha selected the apple pie recipe and set it aside. Then she rolled up her sleeves and began the work of reclaiming her home. By noon, she'd hauled out every piece of ruined furniture, swept ash from every corner, scrubbed the walls with creek water and lye soap until her hands cracked and bled. The physical labor helped, gave her something to focus on beyond the magnitude of loss, beyond the fragile hope Boone's words had planted in her chest. She was attacking the floor with a brush when hoofbeats announced visitors. Martha straightened, expecting Boone. Instead, Helen arrived with two other women Martha recognized from town. Sarah, the livery owner's daughter, and an older widow named Mrs. Kowalski, who ran the boarding house. Helen dismounted carrying a basket. "We brought lunch and glass for your windows. Mr. Tucker had extra panes stored." Martha stood frozen in her doorway, still holding the scrub brush, utterly unprepared for this intrusion of kindness. "You don't have to," she started. "We know we don't have to." Mrs. Kowalski climbed down from her wagon with surprising agility for her age. "We're choosing to. That's the difference." Sarah carried a crate of window glass, setting it carefully on the porch. "I also brought curtain fabric. Nothing fancy, but it'll do until you can replace your own." She hesitated, then met Martha's eyes. "I'm sorry. For how I acted before. For laughing when Clarissa mocked you." The apology hung in the air, awkward and genuine. Martha's throat tightened. "I appreciate that," she managed. "May we come in?" Helen asked gently. "We thought we could help with the cleaning while you rest. You look dead on your feet." Martha wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage alone, to protect herself from the vulnerability of accepting help. But exhaustion made her honest. "I'd be grateful," she said. They worked together through the afternoon, falling into easy rhythm. Mrs. Kowalski attacked the ceiling stains with vinegar solution and impressive profanity. Sarah measured windows and cut glass with practiced precision. Helen sorted through Martha's smoke-damaged belongings, salvaging what could be saved and setting aside what couldn't. They talked while they worked, not small talk, but real conversation. Mrs. Kowalski told stories about her late husband, a prospector who'd died in a mine collapse, leaving her to build a business from nothing. Sarah spoke about running the livery after her father's stroke, fighting to prove herself capable to men who assumed incompetence. Helen admitted her marriage to the minister was loving but lonely, that she'd learned to hide her own thoughts behind appropriate smiles. Martha listened, scrubbing floors, and realized these women carried their own scars. Different from hers, perhaps, but no less real. The territory demanded survival from everyone. Some just hid the cost better than others. "Can I ask you something?" Martha said during a break, when they sat on the porch sharing bread and cheese from Helen's basket. Of course. Helen poured water into tin cups, handing them around. Why now? Why show up after the fire when you never bothered before? The question was blunt, maybe rude, but Martha was too tired for diplomacy. Sarah flinched. Mrs. Kowalski simply nodded as if she'd been expecting it. Because we were cowards, the older woman said flatly. Because it's easier to follow Clarissa's lead than stand against her. Because we told ourselves you preferred being alone rather than admitting we'd frozen you out. She met Martha's gaze without flinching. The fire gave us an excuse to do what we should have done all along, made it easier to show decency without admitting we'd withheld it. The honesty was brutal and refreshing. Martha appreciated it more than pretty lies. And Boone? She asked. Did his involvement make a difference? Yes, Helen admitted quietly. The Callahans carry weight in Jericho Hollow. When Boone showed up asking for help, people listened, but I'd like to think some of us would have come anyway. Eventually. Eventually might have been too late. You're right. Sarah's voice was small. And I'm sorry for that. Truly. Martha studied their faces, genuine remorse, uncomfortable awareness of their own failings, tentative hope that she might forgive them. She thought about Boone's words, about choosing possibility over bitterness, about the exhausting weight of carrying everything alone. Well, she said finally, you're here now. That counts for something. Relief flickered across their expressions. The conversation shifted to practical matters. What Martha needed most urgently, how to organize the rebuild, who might donate additional supplies. By the time they left at sunset, the cabin looked almost habitable. Clean, at least. Organized. Less like a disaster and more like a home in progress. Martha stood on her porch watching them go, overwhelmed by the strange sensation of not being entirely alone. It felt fragile, conditional, like it might evaporate if she examined it too closely. But it also felt real. Boone arrived just as the last wagon disappeared, riding in with a loaded cart hitched behind his horse. He'd brought lumber as promised, plus tools, nails, rope, and a stack of blankets that looked suspiciously new. Thought you might need these, he said, unloading with efficient movements. Cabin's probably drafty with the windows gone. The women brought glass. Sarah's installing them tomorrow. Boone's eyebrows rose. Sarah came? Helen and Mrs. Kowalski, too. They cleaned all day. Martha crossed her arms, studying his expression. Did you ask them to come? No, I asked for help yesterday, but today... He shook his head. That was their choice. Martha wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that their kindness stemmed from genuine care rather than obligation to Boone. But doubt was a habit years in the making. I brought dinner, Boone said, changing the subject. He pulled a wrapped parcel from his saddlebag. Stew for my cook. Figured you hadn't eaten properly. Her stomach growled in response, betraying her. She hadn't eaten since the bread at noon, too focused on work to notice hunger. They settled on the porch steps, sharing the still warm stew directly from the pot, passing a single spoon between them in easy intimacy. How's the ranch? Martha asked. Standing, cattle accounted for. Foreman's grumbling about me being gone, but he'll manage. Boone scraped the bottom of the pot. I'm more concerned about you. Did you rest at all today? Some. A lie, but a small one. Martha. I couldn't just sit while there was work to do. You're going to collapse if you keep pushing like this. His tone held exasperation and concern in equal measure. At least let me help tomorrow. We'll tackle the barn together. You've got your own responsibilities. And I've got capable people to handle them. Let me decide where I'm needed most. He set the empty pot aside, turning to face her fully. I meant what I said last night, about building something together. Can't do that if you won't let me share the work. Martha met his gaze, seeing the determination there, the stubborn commitment that matched her own. She'd spent so long operating as a single unit, trusting only herself, that accepting partnership felt like learning a new language. All right, she said. Tomorrow, we'll work on the barn. Together. Satisfaction flickered across his expression. Good. Now get inside and rest. I'll sleep out here. Keep watch. Boone, that's not non-negotiable, His voice gentled. Please, Martha, let me do this one thing without arguing. She was too tired to fight. She gathered the blankets he'd brought and retreated inside, leaving him on the porch with his bedroll in the vast Wyoming night. Despite exhaustion, sleep came slowly. Her mind churned with the day's revelations. The women's apologies, Boone's steady presence, the uncomfortable awareness that accepting help didn't diminish her strength. When she finally slept, she dreamed of fire and rebuilding, of structures rising from ash, of hands joining hers to lift timber she couldn't manage alone. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee. Martha emerged to find Boone crouched over a small fire, boiling grounds in a battered pot. He looked rumpled and alert, already dressed and clearly ready to work. Thought you could use this, he said, pouring coffee into a tin cup. Martha accepted it gratefully, the bitter warmth cutting through early cold. They drank in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose. Then they set to work. Clearing the barn wreckage was brutal labor. The collapsed timbers were heavy, awkward, still unstable. They worked in tandem, Boone using his height and strength to shift major beams while Martha sorted through debris for salvageable materials. Nails could be straightened. Some boards remained intact. The corrugated metal, once flattened, might serve as temporary roofing. By noon, they'd cleared half the site and stacked usable materials in organized piles. Martha's hands were blistered despite gloves, her back screaming with each bend and lift. Boone looked equally exhausted, sweat darkening his shirt, face streaked with soot. They broke for water and the sandwiches Helen had left yesterday. Sitting in the barn's shadow, or what remained of it, Martha studied the foundation they'd exposed. Stone's still good, she observed. We can build on the existing base. Save time and materials. Boone nodded. We'll need to shore up the north corner where the heat cracked it, but otherwise it's solid. How long do you think to rebuild completely? With 2 of us working steady? He calculated silently. 6 weeks. Maybe 8 if weather turns. Martha did the math. 6 weeks of Boone riding out daily, of working side by side, of this tentative partnership solidifying into something more permanent. The thought thrilled and terrified her equally. That's a lot of time away from your ranch, she said carefully. I've got people managing it. That's why I hired them. Boone met her eyes. This matters more. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. I know what you said about building something together, but why me specifically? You could have any woman in the territory, someone beautiful, refined, easier to what? Boone's jaw tightened. Manage? Control? Someone who'd smile and nod and never challenge me. He set down his sandwich. I don't want easy, Martha. I want real. I want someone who understands hard work and harder choices. Someone who doesn't need rescuing because she's already saved herself a dozen times over. His voice roughened. I want you. Specifically, deliberately, completely. Is that clear enough? Martha's breath caught. She'd asked for honesty and gotten it, raw, unvarnished, impossible to dismiss as politeness or pity. It's clear, she whispered. Good. Boone stood, offering his hand. Now, let's get back to work. This barn won't rebuild itself. They worked until sunset, clearing the rest of the debris and beginning to measure for new framing. The physical labor created space for conversation, easy exchanges about measurements and technique, deeper discussions about their pasts and hopes for the future. Martha found herself sharing stories she'd never told anyone, about her mother's death, about watching her father surrender to grief and alcohol, about the winter that took her brother and left her truly alone. Boone listened without offering platitudes or trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. He simply heard her, acknowledged her losses, and continued working beside her as if her honesty made her more valuable rather than less. As darkness fell, they surveyed their progress. The site was cleared, materials organized, foundation assessed, and marked for repair. Tomorrow they'd start the actual rebuilding, setting posts, raising walls, creating structure from ruins. I should go, Boone said reluctantly. Get back before full dark. Stay. Martha spoke before she could second-guess herself. It's late. You're exhausted. Sleep in the cabin. I'll take the porch. Absolutely not. His tone brooked no argument. You sleep inside. I'll make do out here like last night. Boone, Martha. He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I know what people would say if I stayed inside with you overnight. I won't give them ammunition to use against you. Your reputation matters, even if mine doesn't. The consideration stole her breath. He was protecting her from gossip she hadn't even thought to worry about, sacrificing his own comfort to preserve her standing in a town that had never shown her similar courtesy. Thank you, she said. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle and lingering. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start building. She retreated inside while he settled on the porch, but sleep came easier tonight. The cabin felt less empty knowing he was just beyond the door, keeping watch, choosing her repeatedly in ways both large and small. The days that followed fell into rhythm. Boone arrived each morning with the sun, worked alongside Martha until dusk, then reluctantly departed for his own ranch. The barn took shape incrementally, posts set in stone, walls rising plank by plank, roof beams positioned with careful precision. Other helpers came sporadically. Tucker arrived twice to assist with heavy lifting. Sarah and Helen brought meals and stayed to help with interior work on the cabin. Even a few men from Boone's ranch showed up one Saturday, making a full day's work of framing the barn's upper structure. But mostly it was Martha and Boone, building together in companionable silence broken by easy conversation. They moved around each other with increasing familiarity, anticipating needs, sharing tools without asking, falling into patterns that felt both new and ancient. Martha watched Boone work and felt something shift in her chest, something tender and terrifying that went beyond gratitude or attraction. She was falling in love with him, with his quiet competence, his unflinching honesty, the way he looked at her like she hung the moon and stars. The realization should have sent her running. Instead, it settled over her like warmth after long cold. 3 weeks into the rebuild, Trouble arrived wearing blue silk and a venomous smile. Martha was on the barn roof, securing shingles, when she heard the carriage. She looked down to see Clarissa Vale stepping delicately through the construction site, parasol twirling, picking her way around sawdust and scattered nails like they might contaminate her. "My goodness," Clarissa called up, "how industrious you've become. Though I must say, Martha, roofing work is terribly unbecoming for a lady." Martha set down her hammer, forcing her expression neutral. "Can I help you with something, Miss Vale?" "I was simply curious about all the activity. The whole town's talking about your little project." Clarissa's gaze found Boone, who'd emerged from the cabin carrying lumber. "And about your very dedicated helper." Boone's expression shuddered. "Miss Vale." "Mr. Callahan." Clarissa's smile sharpened. "How charitable of you, spending so much time here, though I wonder what people might think about a respected rancher keeping such close company with an unmarried woman, especially one so desperate for male attention." The insult landed like a slap. Martha's hands clenched on the roof beam. "That's enough." Boone's voice went cold. "You've got no call to speak to Martha that way." "I'm simply concerned about propriety." Clarissa's tone dripped false innocence. "People talk, you know. They see a woman alone, entertaining a man daily, and they draw conclusions. Unfair, perhaps, but inevitable." "Then they're fools." Boone stepped forward. "And if you've come here to spread poison, you can turn right around and leave." "I came to warn you both." Clarissa's mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine malice beneath. "This town has standards. Martha may be content living like frontier trash, but associating with her will damage your reputation, Boone. Your family built respect over decades. Are you truly willing to throw that away for someone so obviously beneath you?" The words hung in the air, cruel, calculated, designed to wound. Martha felt them hit target, reopening every insecurity she'd spent weeks trying to overcome. She climbed down from the roof slowly, refusing to let Clarissa see her shake. "You should go," Martha said quietly. "I'm trying to help you see reason." "No." Martha's voice hardened. "You're trying to hurt me because Boone chose to stand beside me instead of you, because his respect can't be bought with silk dresses and false charm, because you're so small inside that watching someone else be happy makes you vicious." Clarissa's face flushed scarlet. "How dare you? I dare because I'm done caring what you think." Martha stepped closer. "You've mocked me, belittled me, tried to make me ashamed of existing, and I let you. For years I let your cruelty define my worth, but I'm finished with that. I survived things that would break you in half. I rebuilt when everything burned, and I've got someone who sees value in me that you're too shallow to recognize." She met Clarissa's furious gaze without flinching. "So take your warnings and your poison and leave my property before I forget my manners completely." For a moment, Clarissa simply stared, shocked into silence by Martha's defiance. Then her expression twisted into something ugly. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Both of you. I'll make certain of it." She spun on her heel and stalked to her carriage, climbing in with sharp, angry movements. The driver snapped the reins and they rolled away in a cloud of dust and fury. Martha stood trembling, adrenaline making her dizzy. She'd never stood up to Clarissa before, never defended herself so directly. The rush of it was exhilarating and nauseating in equal measure. "Martha," Boone's hand settled on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" "I don't know." She turned to face him. "Was I wrong? Should I have just let her talk?" "No." His expression held fierce pride. "You were magnificent, absolutely magnificent." She meant what she said. "About damaging your reputation, about people talking. Let them talk." Boone pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her despite the broad daylight and potential observers. "I don't give a damn what Clarissa Vale or anyone else thinks. The only opinion that matters is yours." Martha leaned into his embrace, breathing in sawdust and sweat and the steady comfort of his presence. "She'll make trouble. You know she will." "Probably, but we'll face it together." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Unless you're having second thoughts about this, about us." "No." The answer came without hesitation. "No second thoughts." "Then we'll weather whatever comes." He kissed her forehead, lingering. "I'm not going anywhere, Martha Hale. You're stuck with me." She smiled against his chest, letting herself believe it. They stood together in the shadow of the half-built barn, holding each other while the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass and the sun tracked westward across the endless sky. Whatever storm Clarissa intended to unleash, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else, side by side, refusing to break, building something stronger from the ruins. Clarissa's threat materialized 3 days later in the form of whispers that spread through Jericho Hollow like sickness. Martha heard about it from Helen, who arrived at the property with her face drawn tight and her usual warmth replaced by troubled concern. "I thought you should know what people are saying," Helen said without preamble. She'd found Martha in the garden, turning soil for autumn planting, trying to resurrect something green from the scorched earth. Martha straightened, wiping dirt from her hands. "What are they saying?" "That you're living in sin, that Boone stays overnight regularly, that you've compromised yourself deliberately to trap him into marriage." Helen's voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking the words too loudly might make them more true. Clarissa's been to every shop, every church gathering, planting seeds about impropriety and moral corruption. The accusations shouldn't have surprised Martha. She'd known Clarissa would retaliate, but hearing them spoken aloud still felt like a punch to the sternum. "Boone hasn't stayed overnight," Martha said flatly. "He sleeps on the porch when it gets too late to ride back safely, but we've been careful about appearances." "I know that. I believe you. But Clarissa's making sure the story spreads regardless of truth." Helen twisted her hands together. "Some people are starting to talk about bringing it before the church council, about formal censure." Martha's laugh came bitter. "The church never cared about me before. Why start now?" "Because Boone's involved. Because the Callahan name carries weight, and his association with you makes people uncomfortable." Helen stepped closer, lowering her voice further. "Martha, I'm on your side, but I need you to understand how serious this could get. If the council formally condemns your relationship, it won't just be gossip. Merchants could refuse you service. The community could freeze you out completely." "They already have." Martha gestured at her isolated property. "I've been frozen out my whole life." "But now you have allies, people who came to help after the fire. If the church acts, they'll have to choose between supporting you and protecting their own reputations." Helen's expression was pained. "And I'm afraid most will choose themselves." The truth of it settled heavy in Martha's chest. The tentative acceptance she'd begun to trust was fragile, conditional, easily shattered by scandal. She'd been foolish to believe otherwise. What should I do? The question came out smaller than intended. I don't know. Helen's honesty was both refreshing and devastating. Stop seeing Boone, maybe. Let things cool down. Give people time to forget. Absolutely not. Boone's voice cut across the garden. Neither woman had heard him approach, but he stood at the fence line with his horse's reins in hand and fury etched into every line of his body. Martha's not sacrificing anything for small-minded hypocrites. Boone, be reasonable, Helen started. I am being reasonable. Reasonable would be calling out every person spreading lies about Martha's character. Reasonable would be demanding they show proof of their accusations or shut their mouths. He tied his horse and strode toward them. What's unreasonable is expecting Martha to hide away and apologize for existing. Nobody's asking her to apologize, Helen protested, but there are practical considerations. The community's opinion matters, whether we like it or not. Then the community can learn to accept change. Boone reached Martha's side, his hand finding hers automatically. Or they can choke on their own righteousness. Either way, I'm not backing down. Helen looked between them, her expression conflicted. I admire your conviction truly, but you're both underestimating how cruel people can be when they feel their moral authority is challenged. I've survived worse than cruelty. Martha squeezed Boone's hand, drawing strength from his presence. If the town wants to condemn me, let them. I won't hide. Helen sighed. Then at least be strategic. Don't give Clarissa more ammunition. Be seen in town together during daylight. Attend church services. Show people your relationship is honorable, even if it's unconventional. The suggestion made Martha's skin crawl. The thought of performing respectability for people who'd never shown her respect felt like capitulation, but she also recognized the practical wisdom in Helen's words. We'll think about it, Boone said when Martha remained silent. Thank you for the warning, Helen. After Helen left, they stood together in the garden surrounded by struggling seedlings and the skeleton of the half-finished barn. The autumn sun slanted golden across the property, beautiful and indifferent to human drama. I hate this, Martha said quietly. Hate that we have to justify ourselves. Hate that my reputation was worthless until you cared about me, and now suddenly everyone's concerned about propriety. I know. Boone turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. But Helen's right about strategy. Not because you owe anyone an explanation, but because I won't let them hurt you through me. What are you suggesting? We make it official, not hiding, not performing, but declaring our intentions clearly enough that the gossip has nothing to feed on. His jaw tightened. We tell the town we're courting properly, with plans for marriage. Martha's heart stuttered. Marriage? Eventually, when you're ready. Boone's expression softened. I'm not proposing out of obligation or scandal management, Martha. I'm saying what I should have said weeks ago. I want a future with you. A real one. And if announcing that publicly helps silence the people trying to tear you down, then that's what we'll do. The declaration was characteristically direct, lacking flowers or poetry, but ringing with absolute sincerity. Martha searched his face, looking for doubt or resentment at being forced into this position, found only steady determination and something deeper that made her chest ache. You're sure? She asked. About me? About all of this? I've never been more sure of anything. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. You're it for me, Martha Hale. The only question is whether you feel the same. Martha leaned into his embrace, breathing in sawdust and leather and the solid reality of him. Did she feel the same? The answer rose swift and certain, terrifying in its completeness. I do, she whispered against his chest. I love you. I don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between fence posts and fire and rebuilding, you became essential. Boone's arms tightened around her. He pulled back just enough to cup her face, tilting it up to meet his gaze. Say it again. I love you. His kiss was gentle and thorough, a claiming that tasted like promise and relief and barely restrained passion. Martha melted into it, her hands fisting in his shirt, letting herself believe completely for the first time that this was real, that she was wanted, that happiness might actually be possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Boone rested his forehead against hers. We'll do this right, he said. Proper courtship, public intentions, everything by the book. And when we're ready, when you're ready, I'll ask you properly. With a ring and witnesses and all the formality the town could want. And if they still condemn us, then we'll build our life anyway. Together. Exactly as planned. He kissed her forehead. But let's at least try to do this without burning every bridge first. Martha nodded, accepting the compromise. They'd play by the town's rules long enough to prove their relationship was honorable. After that, Jericho Hollow could accept them or not. Either way, she wasn't letting go of what she'd found. The following Sunday, they attended church together. Martha wore her best dress, still patched, still plain, but clean and carefully mended. Boone met her at her property and drove her into town in his wagon, hand resting casually on hers for anyone to see. The church steps were crowded with early arrivals, conversations dying as Martha and Boone approached. Clarissa stood near the door in pale lavender, her expression shifting from surprise to calculation as she registered their arrival. "Well," she said loudly enough to Carrie, "how unexpected. I didn't think you'd have the nerve to show your face, Martha." "Why wouldn't I?" Martha kept her voice level, despite the attention swiveling toward them. "I've done nothing wrong." "Haven't you?" Clarissa's smile was sharp. "The whole town knows about your little arrangement. A man spending nights at your property, unchaperoned, and you expect people to believe it's innocent?" "I expect people to mind their own business." Boone's tone could have cut glass. "But since you've made Martha's business yours, let me clarify. We're courting, properly and publicly, with full intention to marry when the time's right. Does that satisfy your curiosity, Miss Vale?" Shocked silence rippled through the gathered crowd. Several women gasped. The minister himself, standing in the doorway, looked caught between disapproval and surprise. Clarissa recovered quickly, though her smile had frozen into something brittle. "How convenient. Announce an engagement just when the gossip gets uncomfortable." "I'm not announcing an engagement." Boone's patience was clearly wearing thin. "I'm announcing my intentions. There's a difference. Now, if you'll excuse us, we came to worship, not participate in your theater." He guided Martha past Clarissa and into the church, leaving whispers erupting in their wake. They took seats near the middle, not hiding in the back, but not presuming front-row prominence either. Martha's hands shook in her lap until Boone covered them with his own, steady and warm. The service passed in a blur. Martha heard little of the sermon, too aware of eyes boring into her back, of whispered conversations behind gloved hands, of the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. But Boone's presence beside her was an anchor, his occasional squeeze of her hand a reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. After the service, people approached cautiously. Some offered tentative congratulations on the courtship announcement. Others simply nodded, acknowledging their presence without warmth or censure. A few turned away entirely, their disapproval clear in the set of their shoulders. Mrs. Kowalski, the boarding house owner who'd helped clean Martha's cabin, pushed through the crowd with her usual bluntness. "About time someone made an honest woman of you," she said to Boone. "Though I suppose making an honest man of him works just as well." She turned to Martha. "Don't let the gossips bother you, dear. Half of them are just jealous they didn't catch a Callahan themselves." The backhanded support was oddly comforting. Tucker and his wife offered genuine well-wishes, as did several ranch hands from neighboring properties. Helen appeared with a basket of preserves, her smile warm and relieved. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly to Martha. "Showing your face takes courage." "Showing my face is what I've been doing my whole life," Martha replied. "People just choose to see me differently now. Then their eyes are finally opening." Helen squeezed her hand. "Hold your head high. You've earned that right." But not everyone was pleased. As they left the church grounds, a cluster of older women blocked their path. The leader was Mrs. Pritchard, a steel-haired matron who ran the ladies' auxiliary with iron control. "Mr. Callahan," she said icily, "a word, if you please." Boone's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Ma'am, the church council has been discussing certain situations that reflect poorly on our community's moral standards." Mrs. Pritchard's gaze flickered to Martha with barely concealed disdain. "While your announcement of courtship is noted, there remains concern about the propriety of your relationship's development." "What concern specifically?" Boone's voice was dangerously calm. "Unchaperoned visits, extended time alone. The appearance of impropriety, even if actual impropriety, cannot be proven. Mrs. Pritchard drew herself up. The council recommends a formal engagement with proper chaperonage until marriage. Anything less suggests a lack of respect for Christian values. Martha felt heat crawl up her neck. The humiliation of being lectured on morality by women who'd ignored her existence for years was almost unbearable. With respect, Mrs. Pritchard, Boone said, my relationship with Miss Hale is none of the council's business. It becomes our business when it threatens the community's moral fabric. The only thing threatening this community's moral fabric is hypocrisy. Boone's patience finally snapped. Where was this council's concern when Martha was struggling alone after the fire? Where were these Christian values when she was mocked and excluded for years? You didn't care about her welfare until I did, and now suddenly you're desperate to control how we conduct ourselves. Mr. Callahan, I'm not finished. His voice carried across the church grounds, drawing attention from everyone still lingering. Martha Hale has more integrity in her little finger than most of this town combined. She survived things that would break your strongest men. She's rebuilt from nothing with her own hands. And yes, I've helped her, because that's what decent people do. If you want to condemn me for that, go ahead. But leave her out of your moral calculations. Mrs. Pritchard's face flushed crimson. How dare you speak to me? I dare because someone needs to. Boone stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Martha. Here's what's going to happen. Martha and I will continue our courtship as we see fit. We'll marry when we're ready, not when you approve. And if the council wants to make an issue of it, they can explain to the entire territory why they're more concerned with gossip than actual Christian charity. He offered Martha his arm, and they walked away from the sputtering matron and shocked onlookers, leaving Jericho Hollow's judgment literally in the dust behind them. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs, adrenaline and terror and fierce pride tangling together. Boone had just alienated himself from the church council for her, had publicly defended her against the town's moral authority. The consequences could be severe: social isolation, business complications, damage to the Callahan reputation that had taken decades to build. You didn't have to do that, she said once they were in the wagon, rolling away from town. Yes, I did. Boone's hands were tight on the reins. I'm done watching people disrespect you, done pretending their opinions matter more than your dignity. But the council can go to hell. He glanced at her, expression softening slightly. Sorry, that's probably blasphemous after church. Despite everything, Martha laughed, a startled, slightly hysterical sound that released some of the tension coiled in her chest. I think we're past worrying about blasphemy. Probably. Boone's mouth quirked, though we should probably expect consequences. Mrs. Pritchard's got influence. She'll use it. I know. Martha stared at the prairie rolling past, golden grass rippling under autumn wind. Are you sure this is worth it, fighting the whole town for me? Boone pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the empty road. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Martha, listen to me carefully. You are worth fighting for, worth standing beside, worth choosing over and over again, no matter what it costs. His grip tightened. I don't care if the whole territory turns against us. I don't care if we have to build our life completely alone. You're what matters, not them. Tears blurred her vision. She'd spent so long believing herself unworthy of such devotion that hearing it spoken aloud felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. I love you, she said, the words coming easier now. So much it terrifies me. Good. Boone pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Be terrified with me. We'll figure it out together. They continued home in comfortable silence, and Martha felt something settle in her bones. A certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Side by side, refusing to break, building something stronger from whatever ruins others tried to leave them in. The consequences Mrs. Pritchard promised arrived within days. The general store owner refused to extend Martha credit, citing concerns about her moral character. The seamstress turned away her business. Even the farrier, who'd always been willing to shoe her mare, suddenly had no time available. But for every door that closed, another opened. Tucker started bringing supplies from the neighboring town, refusing payment beyond cost. Mrs. Kowalski made it known that anyone who mistreated Martha would find themselves without lodging when they needed it. Several ranch families sent word through Boone that they stood with him regardless of church politics. The territory was choosing sides, and the division ran deeper than Martha or Boone alone. It became about power, whether the church council could dictate community relationships, whether old money and old names held more weight than individual choice, whether survival and strength mattered more than conventional propriety. Martha watched it unfold with strange detachment, focused on the work that mattered. The barn was nearly complete now, weathertight and functional, if not beautiful. Her garden showed green shoots despite the late season. The cabin felt increasingly like home rather than temporary shelter. And Boone was there through all of it, steady as stone, choosing her with his presence even when words weren't necessary. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, Boone pulled something from his pocket. "I know I said I'd wait until you were ready," he started, "and I'm not asking for an answer now, but I want you to have this." He opened his palm to reveal a ring, simple gold band with a small sapphire that caught the fading light. Not elaborate or expensive, but beautiful in its honest craftsmanship. "It was my mother's," Boone said quietly. "The only thing she brought west from Virginia. My uncle kept it after she died, gave it to me when he passed." He met Martha's eyes. "I'd be honored if you'd wear it, not as an engagement yet, if you're not ready, but as a promise. That I'm here, that I'm staying, that when you are ready, my answer will be yes." Martha stared at the ring, her throat tight. She thought about promises, how they'd been broken throughout her life, how trust had been weaponized and disappointed so many times she'd stopped believing in constancy. But Boone had kept every promise he'd made, had shown up when he said he would, had stood beside her when it was costly, had chosen her repeatedly, deliberately, without wavering. Maybe it was time to trust that some promises were meant to be kept. "I'm ready," she said. Boone's expression shifted, hope and surprise and careful restraint. "Ready? To say yes, to wear your ring, to build a life together properly." Martha took the ring from his palm, studying the way the sapphire caught light. "I'm ready to stop being afraid of happiness." "Martha Hale." Boone's voice was rough with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you let me stand beside you for whatever comes? Will you trust me with your future, even though I can't promise it'll be easy?" "Yes." The answer came clear and certain. To all of it, yes. Boone took the ring and slid it onto her finger. A perfect fit, as if his mother had known across decades and distance that it belonged there. Then he pulled Martha into his arms and kissed her properly, deeply, with all the passion and promise and fierce devotion he'd been restraining for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the sun had set completely. Stars emerged overhead, brilliant and indifferent, the same stars that had watched the prairie swallow countless dreams and nurture stubborn hope in equal measure. "We'll make it official in town," Boone said. "Announce it properly. Give them no room to question our intentions." "Let them question." Martha rested her head on his shoulder, the ring warm and solid on her finger. "I'm done caring what they think." "That's my girl." Boone pressed a kiss to her temple. "Fierce and unbending, exactly as you should be." They sat together as the night deepened, holding each other against the autumn chill and the uncertainty of what came next. The barn stood complete behind them, testimony to what they could build together. The cabin glowed with lamplight, no longer a shelter of last resort, but a home they'd chosen. Jericho Hollow might never fully accept them. Clarissa would continue spreading poison. The church council might maintain their censure. But Martha found she didn't care anymore. She had everything that mattered, work that meant something, land that was hers, and a man who saw her completely and chose her anyway. The prairie stretched vast and unforgiving around them, but for the first time in her life, Martha Hale felt like she belonged exactly where she was. Not despite her size or her struggles or her unconventional path, but because of them. Because survival had made her strong. Because loss had taught her to value what remained. Because choosing hope over bitterness was the bravest thing she'd ever done. And tomorrow, they'd face whatever came together. building, choosing, loving with stubborn determination that matched the land itself. The engagement announcement appeared in the Jericho Hollow Gazette 3 days later, paid for by Boone and written with deliberate formality that left no room for misinterpretation. Mr. Boone Callahan and Miss Martha Hale were pleased to announce their intention to marry in the spring, with ceremony details to follow. It was proper, public, and completely unambiguous. The reaction split the town cleanly down the middle. Martha learned about the depth of the division when she ventured into town alone the following Saturday, needing supplies Tucker couldn't source from the neighboring settlement. She tied her mare outside the general store and steeled herself before entering, the sapphire ring solid and reassuring on her finger. The store fell silent when she walked in. 3 women clustered near the fabric bolts turned to stare. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor who'd refused her credit the previous week, froze behind his counter. Martha lifted her chin and approached with her shopping list in hand. "Mr. Henderson, I need flour, sugar, and lamp oil." He didn't move. The silence stretched taut and uncomfortable. "I said I need supplies." Martha kept her voice level despite the heat crawling up her neck. "Will you serve me or not?" Henderson's gaze darted to the watching women, then back to Martha. "I heard about the engagement. Congratulations are in order, I suppose." "I don't need congratulations. I need flour." One of the women near the fabric bolt stepped forward. Mrs. Patterson, a rancher's wife Martha recognized but had never spoken to directly. "For what it's worth, I think you and Boone make a fine match. My husband says Callahan's never looked happier." The unexpected support startled Martha into momentary silence. "Mrs." Patterson smiled tentatively and continued. "We've been talking, some of us, about how the church council's been handling things, about how they're more interested in control than actual Christian charity." She glanced at the other women, who nodded. "You're not alone in this, Miss Hale. More people support you than you might think." Martha's throat tightened. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Henderson cleared his throat. "The flour and sugar, I've got both in stock, and I apologize for last week. It was wrong of me to turn you away." The apology was grudging but genuine. Martha accepted it with a nod and completed her purchase, exchanging brief but warm words with Mrs. Patterson and another woman who approached to offer quiet congratulations. Not everyone in the store was friendly. 2 women left rather than share space with her, their disapproval clear in the set of their shoulders. But enough people showed support that Martha left feeling less isolated than she'd expected. She was loading supplies into her cart when a shadow fell across her path. Clarissa Vale stood on the boardwalk in burgundy silk, her expression carefully composed but her eyes sharp with malice. "I see congratulations are in order," Clarissa said. Her tone dripped false sweetness. "How fortunate for you that Boone felt obligated to make an honest woman of you after such extensive time alone together." Martha straightened slowly, meeting Clarissa's gaze without flinching. "There's no obligation involved. He asked because he wanted to. I said yes for the same reason." "How romantic." Clarissa's smile could have cut glass. "Though I wonder how long his infatuation will last once the novelty wears off, once he realizes what he's actually bound himself to." "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning you're still the same woman you've always been, Martha. Large, plain, unsuitable for the wife of a prominent rancher. He may think he wants you now, but eventually he'll see what everyone else sees. He'll regret tying himself to someone so fundamentally beneath him." The words landed like physical blows, targeting every insecurity Martha had spent months trying to overcome. For a moment, she felt herself shrinking, the old shame rising up to choke her. Then she thought about Boone riding into fire for her, about him standing against the church council, about the way he looked at her like she was precious beyond measure. "You're wrong," Martha said quietly. "About what Boone sees. About what I am. About everything." She stepped closer, close enough to see the desperation beneath Clarissa's practiced cruelty. "You're terrified that I might actually be happy, that someone might choose me over you. Because if that's possible, then maybe all the shallow beauty and perfect manners you've cultivated don't matter as much as you thought they did." Clarissa's face went white, then flooded with color. "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm done being afraid of you." Martha's voice remained steady despite her pounding heart. You've spent years making me feel worthless because it made you feel powerful. But I'm not worthless, and your opinion of me never mattered. The only opinions that matter are mine and Boone's, and we've already decided what we're worth to each other." She turned away before Clarissa could respond, climbing into her cart with hands that shook only slightly. As she drove away, she caught a glimpse of Clarissa's face in the store window, shocked, furious, and underneath it all, something that looked almost like fear. Martha had taken her power back, and Clarissa Vale would never forgive her for it. The confrontation left Martha feeling both exhilarated and exhausted. She drove home with her supplies and her hard-won dignity intact, already planning how to tell Boone about the morning's events. But when she arrived at her property, she found more than just Boone waiting. 3 wagons were parked near the barn, and a crew of men was working on her land. Not just working, but building something new. Martha climbed down slowly, trying to make sense of the organized chaos. Boone appeared from behind the barn, sawdust in his hair and a smile on his face. "What's all this?" Martha asked. "Wedding present. From me and about a dozen families who wanted to help." He gestured to the activity. "We're building you a proper chicken coop, reinforcing the barn loft, and putting in a root cellar before winter hits. Tucker's over there working on the well housing. Mrs. Patterson's husband is helping frame out the coop." Martha stared at the men working with easy efficiency, calling instructions to each other, and moving with the coordinated purpose of people who'd done this before. "I can't accept—" "You're not accepting charity. You're accepting community." Boone took her hand, his grip warm and sure. "These people want to help. Some because they support us. Some because they're tired of the church council's bullying. Some just because it's the right thing to do. Let them." Tears blurred Martha's vision. She'd spent so long surviving alone that accepting help still felt like admitting weakness. But watching these men work together on her behalf, seeing the tangible evidence of support and solidarity, she felt something shift inside her chest. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Mrs. Patterson and Helen are inside organizing your kitchen. Said something about it being a disaster and refusing to let you cook in chaos." Boone's expression held fond exasperation. "I tried to stop them, but apparently I don't get a vote." Martha laughed, genuine and surprised, and followed him toward the cabin. Inside, she found Helen and Mrs. Patterson elbow-deep in reorganization, moving supplies and cleaning surfaces with the ruthless efficiency of women on a mission. "There you are," Helen said without pausing in her work. "We're setting up proper storage. You can't cook for a wedding with everything scattered like this." "The wedding's not until spring," Martha started, "which gives us barely enough time to prepare properly." Mrs. Patterson wiped her hands on her apron. "Helen and I have been discussing. Small ceremony, maybe 30 people, reception in the church hall if Mrs. Pritchard can be convinced to allow it. Otherwise, we'll do it at the Grange." "I haven't even thought about details yet," Martha admitted. "Well, we have." Helen smiled warmly. "And we're here to help, if you want us." Martha looked at these women who'd shown up to organize her life without being asked, who'd chosen her side despite social cost, who were treating her wedding like it mattered. The generosity of it overwhelmed her completely. "I want you," she managed through the tightness in her throat. "I'd be honored to have your help." They spent the afternoon planning while the men worked outside. Mrs. Patterson had strong opinions about flowers. Wildflowers from the prairie, simple and honest. Helen suggested a cake from the bakery in the neighboring town, since the local baker sided with Mrs. Pritchard. They discussed Martha's dress, debating whether to order something ready-made or commission the seamstress in the next county who'd be willing to work with Martha's measurements without judgment. It felt surreal, sitting in her kitchen discussing wedding details like she was any other bride, like her happiness was something worth celebrating rather than condemning. But it also felt right in a way Martha couldn't quite articulate. This was what community was supposed to be, people showing up, making space, choosing support over judgment. By evening, the chicken coop stood complete and the root cellar was framed out. The men departed with promises to return the following weekend to finish the remaining work. Helen and Mrs. Patterson left after extracting promises from Martha to think about her dress and make decisions about the ceremony. Finally, Martha and Boone were alone in the deepening twilight, standing together surveying the day's transformation of her property. "This is real, isn't it?" Martha said quietly. "We're actually doing this. We're actually doing this." Boone wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. Having second thoughts? No, just overwhelmed. In a good way. She leaned into his solid warmth. I confronted Clarissa today. In town. His arm tightened around her. What happened? Martha recounted the exchange, including her final words to Clarissa about taking her power back. Boone listened without interrupting, his expression growing more satisfied as she spoke. I'm proud of you, he said when she finished. That took real courage. It felt necessary, like I couldn't move forward until I'd faced her directly. Martha turned in his arms to look up at him. I'm not the same woman I was when we met. You've changed me. No. Boone cupped her face gently. I just helped you see what was already there. The strength, the courage, the stubborn refusal to quit. That was always you, Martha. I just reminded you to claim it. She kissed him then, pouring into it all the gratitude and love and fierce determination she couldn't put into words. Boone responded with matching intensity, his hands gentle but possessive on her waist, anchoring her to this moment and this choice and this impossible, beautiful future they were building together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the stars had emerged overhead in their usual brilliant indifference. Stay tonight, Martha said impulsively. Not on the porch, inside, with me. Boone's expression shifted, desire and restraint warring visibly. Martha, we agreed to do this properly. Wait until marriage. I know what we agreed, but I'm tired of letting other people's rules dictate how we love each other. She took his hand, placing it over her heart so he could feel it racing. I'm choosing you, completely. I don't want to wait anymore. The town will talk. Mrs. Pritchard will use it against us. Let them talk. Let her try. Martha's voice steadied with conviction. We're getting married regardless. What happens between us now is nobody's business but ours. Boone searched her face, looking for doubt or uncertainty. Martha met his gaze without wavering, letting him see her absolute certainty. Are you sure? He asked softly. I've never been more sure of anything. He kissed her again, slow, deep, full of promise and barely leashed passion. Then he swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold of her cabin, kicking the door shut behind them. Whatever happened next belonged only to them, private and sacred, and entirely their own choice. The next morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin windows and the unfamiliar warmth of another body in her bed. Martha woke slowly, luxuriously, wrapped in Boone's arms with her head pillowed on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady, reliable, exactly like the man himself. Morning, Boone murmured, his voice rough with sleep. His hand traced lazy patterns on her back. No regrets? None. Martha tilted her head up to kiss his jaw. You? Only that I didn't do this sooner. He rolled them so he could look down at her properly, his expression tender and possessive in equal measure. I love you, Martha Hale. Future Mrs. Callahan. The name sent a thrill through her chest. Mrs. Callahan. Martha Callahan. A new identity that didn't erase who she'd been, but expanded it, made space for partnership and belonging alongside her hard-won independence. I love you too, she said, more than I knew was possible. They lingered in bed longer than practical, talking quietly about the future they'd build together. Boone wanted to combine their properties, creating one large ranch operation. Martha wanted to keep her cabin but build additions, a proper kitchen, more bedrooms for the children they both hoped for, space to grow into their life together. It felt miraculous, planning a future with such specific detail. Martha had spent so long just surviving that the luxury of hope still felt foreign and precious. Eventually, necessity drove them from bed. They had work to do, appearances to maintain, a wedding to plan. But first, coffee on the porch and shared breakfast in comfortable silence, the kind of domestic intimacy Martha had never imagined experiencing. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. The root cellar was completed and stocked with preserves for winter. The barn received its final reinforcements. Martha's cabin underwent gradual transformation as Boone and various volunteers added improvements. Glass windows that actually sealed properly, reinforced walls, a new stove that heated more efficiently. The town continued its divided response to their engagement. Mrs. Pritchard's faction maintained their disapproval, refusing to acknowledge Martha in public and making pointed comments about moral degradation. But an equally vocal contingent rallied around them. Families who'd grown tired of church politics, younger couples who saw their relationship as romantic rather than scandalous, practical ranchers who respected Boone's judgment and Martha's capability. The Gazette ran a surprisingly supportive editorial about frontier marriages built on partnership rather than conventional propriety. Tucker organized a barn raising at the Callahan Ranch and made sure half the attendees were people who'd declared for Martha and Boone. Small gestures of solidarity appeared regularly. Extra eggs left on Martha's porch, firewood mysteriously stacked near her barn, invitations to community events that had previously excluded her. Slowly, incrementally, Jericho Hollow was choosing sides, and enough people chose kindness that the balance began to shift. 6 weeks before the planned spring wedding, Clarissa made her final play. She appeared at Martha's property on a cold February afternoon, arriving in her father's carriage without warning or invitation. Martha saw her coming from the window and steeled herself for confrontation, stepping onto the porch to meet her. Clarissa climbed down alone, dismissing her driver with a wave. She approached the cabin slowly, and Martha noticed something different about her. The usual armor of perfect composure had cracked, revealing something desperate and almost fragile beneath. "I need to speak with you," Clarissa said without preamble. "Then speak." Martha crossed her arms, refusing to make this easy. Clarissa took a breath, visibly gathering herself. "I came to apologize. For everything. For the cruelty, the gossip, the deliberate attempts to ruin your relationship with Boone. All of it." Martha stared, too shocked to respond immediately. This was the last thing she'd expected. "I don't expect forgiveness," Clarissa continued, words tumbling out in a rush. "I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that I recognize what I did was wrong. Worse than wrong. It was vicious and small and born from my own insecurity." She looked down at her hands, twisting together in front of her. "I've spent my whole life being told my value came from being beautiful and refined and desirable. When Boone chose you instead of me, it shattered everything I thought I knew about my worth. So you tried to destroy mine." Martha's voice was flat. "Yes. Because if you could be valued despite not fitting the mold I'd been taught mattered, then what did that say about me? About all the effort I'd put into being perfect?" Clarissa met Martha's gaze finally, and her eyes were red-rimmed. "I was terrified that maybe beauty and manners don't matter as much as strength and honesty. That maybe I've wasted my entire life on things that don't actually make me valuable." The confession was so raw, so utterly devoid of Clarissa's usual performance, that Martha felt her anger begin to soften despite herself. "Why tell me this now?" she asked. "Because Mrs. Pritchard approached my father last week. She wants to arrange a marriage between me and Edmund Hartwell, the banker's son. He's twice my age, controlling, mean when he drinks. But he's wealthy and respectable, and she thinks the match would strengthen her position against you and Boone." Clarissa's voice cracked. "My father's considering it, and I realize that while I've been busy trying to tear down your happiness, I've trapped myself in a cage of other people's expectations." She stepped closer, desperation clear in every line of her body. "I don't expect you to care. I don't expect anything, but watching you choose your own path, refuse to apologize for taking up space, stand up to everyone including me, it made me realize I've never done any of that. I've just performed for approval my entire life." Martha studied Clarissa's face, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda, found only exhaustion and genuine anguish. "What do you want from me?" Martha asked carefully. "Nothing. Just to say I'm sorry, to admit you were right about me being afraid of your happiness, and to ask if you might tell me how you did it, how you learned to stop caring what people think." The request was so unexpected that Martha almost laughed. Instead, she gestured to the porch steps. "Sit down." Clarissa obeyed, sinking onto the steps like a marionette with cut strings. Martha settled beside her, maintaining careful distance but offering the intimacy of shared space. "I didn't stop caring overnight," Martha said. "It was incremental. Every time I survived something I thought would break me, I got a little stronger. Every time someone dismissed me and I kept going anyway, I proved to myself that their opinion didn't define my worth." She looked at Clarissa. But the real change came when Boone saw me differently than I saw myself. When he valued things about me I thought were flaws. That's when I started believing maybe I wasn't worthless after all. You were never worthless, Clarissa said quietly. I just needed you to believe you were so I could feel superior. I know. Martha's honesty was neither cruel nor kind, simply factual. And that's something you'll have to live with. But it doesn't mean you can't choose differently going forward. How? I don't know how to be anything except what I've always been. Then figure it out. Start small. Say no to one thing you don't want. Choose one thing that's for yourself rather than for approval. Martha turned to face her fully. And tell your father no about Edmund Hartwell. Your happiness matters more than Mrs. Pritchard's social chess game. Clarissa's laugh was bitter and broken. My father won't listen. He thinks marriage to Hartwell will secure our family's position. Then make him listen. Fight for yourself the way you fought against me. You've got plenty of fire, Clarissa. Just point it in a different direction. They sat in silence for a long moment, two women who'd been enemies finding unexpected common ground in the shared experience of being underestimated and controlled by others' expectations. Finally, Clarissa stood, smoothing her skirts with shaking hands. Thank you for not throwing me off your property, for listening when you had every right to refuse. Everyone deserves a chance to change, Martha said. Doesn't mean I trust you yet, but I'll give you the opportunity to prove you mean what you say. Clarissa nodded, something like hope flickering across her face. For what it's worth, I think Boone chose well. Better than he would have if he'd chosen me. She returned to her carriage and departed, leaving Martha alone with the strange sensation of having extended grace to someone who'd caused her tremendous pain. It didn't erase the past, didn't make them friends, but it cracked open the door to something other than perpetual animosity. When Boone arrived that evening, Martha told him about Clarissa's visit. He listened with furrowed brow, clearly conflicted about whether to trust the apology. Do you believe her? He asked. I think she believes herself right now. Whether it lasts is another question. Martha leaned against him. But I'm tired of carrying anger. It's exhausting and it doesn't change anything, so I'll give her the chance to prove she's sincere. If she fails, at least I tried. Boone kissed her temple. You're a better person than I am. I'd have sent her packing. Maybe, but you're the one who taught me that choosing possibility over bitterness takes more strength. She smiled up at him. I'm just following your example. 2 weeks later, word spread through Jericho Hollow that Clarissa Vale had refused Edmund Hartwell's suit. More shocking, she'd publicly broken with Mrs. Pritchard's faction, declaring she was tired of cruelty disguised as righteousness. The announcement sent ripples through the town's social structure, fracturing Mrs. Pritchard's coalition and emboldening others who'd been quietly sympathetic to Martha and Boone. The church council's power began to crumble. Without Clarissa's social influence supporting them, without unified community backing, they couldn't maintain their moral authority. The minister himself, growing weary of politics, quietly suggested that perhaps the council should focus less on policing relationships and more on actual Christian charity. By early March, the tide had turned decisively. Mrs. Pritchard maintained her disapproval but lacked the backing to make it matter. The church hall was secured for the wedding reception. Local merchants competed to provide services. The community that had once excluded Martha now embraced her approaching marriage with genuine celebration. The wedding took place on a brilliant April morning when the prairie came alive with wildflowers and possibility. Martha wore a dress commissioned from the seamstress in the next county. Simple ivory cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs fitted to her body without apology or concealment. Helen had woven wildflowers into her hair. The sapphire ring Boone had given her months ago caught the light as she carried a bouquet of prairie roses and sage. The ceremony was held outdoors on Martha's property, with the rebuilt barn as backdrop and the vast Wyoming sky overhead. 30 people attended, friends, supporters, allies who'd chosen kindness over judgment. Tucker stood as Boone's witness. Helen stood as Martha's. The minister performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, having apparently decided that love built on partnership and mutual respect was more Christian than the church council's rigid propriety. When he pronounced them married, Boone kissed Martha thoroughly enough to draw applause and a few good-natured whistles. The reception at the church hall was simple but joyful. Food provided by a dozen families, dancing to fiddle music, toasts that celebrated the couple's hard-won happiness. Mrs. Kowalski gave a speech about survival and stubbornness that had everyone laughing. Tucker's wife presented them with a beautiful quilt pieced from fabric scraps, representing the community coming together. Even Clarissa attended, standing at the back in a modest blue dress, offering a tentative smile when Martha caught her eye. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was possibility. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Boone pulled Martha onto the dance floor. They moved together with the easy familiarity of partners who'd worked side by side through crisis and rebuilding, who'd chosen each other repeatedly when choosing alone would have been easier. "Happy, Mrs. Callahan?" Boone asked, his arms secure around her waist. "Impossibly happy." Martha rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "I keep waiting to wake up and find this was a dream. It's real. We're real." He kissed the top of her head. "And tomorrow we start the rest of our life. Together." They danced until the stars emerged, until the guests began departing with warm wishes and promises to visit soon, until only the two of them remained in the lantern-lit hall. Then they walked home together across the prairie, hand in hand, the newly combined Callahan property stretching around them in the darkness. The cabin waited with lamps burning in the windows, warm and welcoming, no longer a shelter of last resort, but a home they'd chosen and built together. The barn stood solid against the night sky, testimony to what they could create from ruins. The land stretched vast and unforgiving, but also full of promise. Cattle to tend, crops to plant, children to raise, a future to build from this foundation of fire and rebuilding and stubborn refusal to quit. Martha stood on the porch one last time as Martha Hale, the sapphire ring joined now by a simple gold band, watching the prairie wind move through the grass. She thought about the woman she'd been when Boone first rode up asking for directions, isolated, worn down by years of mockery and exclusion, convinced she was too much of all the wrong things to ever be wanted. That woman felt like a stranger now. In her place stood someone who'd survived fire and gossip and her own deep-seated shame to claim happiness despite every obstacle. Someone who'd learned that strength came in forms beyond physical survival, that choosing hope over bitterness was an act of courage, that accepting help didn't diminish her capability. Someone who'd discovered she was worth fighting for, worth choosing, worth loving exactly as she was. Boone appeared in the doorway behind her, backlit by warm lamplight, his expression soft with contentment. "Coming to bed, wife?" he asked. Martha turned to him, this man who'd ridden into fire for her, who'd stood against his entire community, who'd seen her completely and chosen her anyway, who'd helped her rebuild not just barns and fences, but her fundamental understanding of her own worth. "Coming, husband," she said, taking his offered hand. They crossed the threshold together into their home, their marriage, their hard-won future. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold prairie night and the judgment that had once defined Martha's existence. Inside was warmth and safety, and the profound peace of being exactly where she belonged. The territory remained harsh. Winter would come again. Challenges would arise. But they'd face everything the same way they'd faced everything that brought them to this moment, side by side, refusing to break, building something stronger from whatever ruins life handed them. Martha Callahan fell asleep that night, wrapped in her husband's arms, her property secure around her, her future bright with possibility. She'd stopped apologizing for taking up space in a world that had never made room for women like her. She'd claimed her worth despite every voice that said she was worthless. And under the vast, indifferent Wyoming stars, that was more than enough. It was everything.